Good morning and welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Phil Mackintosh, our Chief Economist at Nasdaq, to review how policymakers and investors model out the global economic impact of the coronavirus and focus on getting back to work. Phil, stocks opened sharply higher, although it's challenging to pinpoint where the good news is coming from besides stocks trading sharply lower on Monday and Tuesday. Perhaps there's also some of an oil bounce in there. What are you taking a look at this morning?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a little bit of a relief rally. Like you said, oil has stopped falling and it's having a little bit of a bounce back itself. There's a couple of earnings that came out this morning. Delta wasn't as bad as people thought it might be. So potentially it's just a little bit of a breather. We've had a really good week or two before this week and a little bit of a retracement this week. It definitely seems like what's happening in the stock market is the new case data anymore, and that's sort of obvious from the discussions we've been having. Had the cases declining earlier this week, and net the market's been negative on that. So people are obviously looking at more stock specific things and other factors in the market.
Well, let's take a look at our COVID-19 data. U.S. cases hit a record, and if you take a look at this chart, it's pretty glaring to me. I feel like we have not heard much about this data, and could it be because more testing is being done?
I mean, I've seen this data today, and there's a couple of people saying that yesterday was a new record for US cases, which is obviously not good news, especially if we're talking about trying to get back to normalcy. There's a lot of countries in Europe that are starting to open up, and they've got 2 and 3 step plans. And part of the first step is to get people, back into smaller shops, back into smaller social settings, and hope that there's no reignition of new cases. So getting the cases under control is really important. Having 30,000, or in this case, nearly 40,000 new cases a day in the US alone is going to make that difficult, because there's enough people walking around that are COVID positive that if we start to put them in contact with everybody else, that it will spread a lot more quickly again, as we saw with the ramp up in early March.
Yeah, and if we take a look at our last chart of the day, speaking of completed tests, this is going to be the most important thing to get Americans back to work, and perhaps doing it on a regional basis, we can learn what's working and what's not and adopt those measures to other parts of the country.
Yeah, we've said this a lot of times, and a lot of people have been saying, we just need to do more testing. And I think that's what comes out of this data is we've kind of got stuck at 150,000 tests a day. That's not very many. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but there's over 300 million Americans. So we're talking about 5 years until everybody can be tested at this rate. And that's why people say we really need to be able to do a lot more testing. The flip side to that is something we talked about yesterday, where some of the counties and the hospitals that have been able to do more randomized testing have found that potentially as much as 15% of the population has been exposed and may already have some antibodies and immunity to COVID. And that's just because there's a lot more asymptomatic people. If that's the case, maybe 16 million people have already got some sort of immunity. But it'd be nice to know that. And really, we want to have tests so that we can prove that, so that things like airlines and train travel can be safe.
All right. Phil, thank you so much for joining us on Trade Talks as always.
You're welcome.
All right. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.